ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be
Welcome
in
to Deep Dive
pictures
Movie
all
Reviews with my
over.
friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. On this episode, we are talking Luca Guadagnino's Bones and All.
Hey, but before we begin, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and did hit that subscribe button. And while you're there, go ahead and ding the little bell next to it. And that way you're notified every single time we upload a new video. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers. We're going to be explaining it all. James?
Okay, so Bones and All is adaptation of Camille D'Angelis's 2016 novel, which I think is fair. You could call it a YA, young adult novel. It does fit squarely into that criteria. Set in the 1980s in sort of small town, middle America. And it follows Marin, played by Taylor Russell, who's a teenage girl who has a bit of what she thinks is a bit of a problem. She loves the taste of human flesh. Her father is aware of the problem, but it has been causing issues and it's forced them to move from town to town. After the last incident, her father ups and abandons her. He says, you're 18, you're old enough to live on your own, and he just leaves her an envelope of money, her birth certificate, and an audio tape by way of explanation. She goes off in search of her mother, who she hasn't seen since she was a baby, who may or may not hold the answers to all of her problems about why is she like this, and very quickly realizes that she's not alone in the world, and there are others out there just like her.
James, before we discuss Bones and All, this is a subject matter that I'm a little bit apprehensive about. When I went in to see this movie, this isn't one that I would normally see, but now that I am a partner with you in Deep Dive Movie Reviews, we are doing some of the most critically acclaimed films, and so I had to, but you know, we've often said our YouTube channel alludes to the fact that we like to do these reviews over drinks. We don't always highlight that, but I thought, given the subject matter, I was going to make myself a gin and soda. And so that's what I've got here today. And I just want to highlight, a good friend of mine left Hong Kong recently and left me 6 bottles of gin. And so one of them is this craft gin, Autograph Gin, and it's from South Africa. And it's delightful. So just want to give them a plug. We make no, this is not a sponsorship. We have no kickback on this. Just letting people know this is a fantastic craft gin. So if you get a chance, check it out.
I am just enjoying a wee dram of Buffalo Trace Kentucky.
Oh, there we go.
Kentucky bourbon. I figured, as we're doing an American movie, very much about America, about the Midwest, would you call it even?
Yeah, middle American values, baseball, apple pie, and human flesh and cannibalism. So there we go. You know, James, it's hard to be a critic for this movie. This movie's won a number of awards. It's doing really well at film festivals in different places around the world. And so to come in it as a critic, this is a subject matter which I'm a little bit apprehensive about. I'm trying to critique the film on its artistic level, and yet, if I'm honest, there are aspects of this film that honestly repulse me. They, as a human being, it hits me viscerally. And you know, I'm a big Dune fan. And if you ever read the appendix of Dune, they do a whole appendix on the religion of the universe in Dune. And I don't know if you've ever read it, but in a nutshell, they talk about how they get basically all the religious leaders in a convocation. It takes them years. Basically, they want to disseminate religion so that we can have one religion. Let's all get along. Let's have a universal religion. And kind of, can we just pull from these different belief systems, and they come up with the Orange Catholic Bible. But when it's minimalized down to it's reduced to its most reductive element, there's one commandment that's in the religion of the Dune universe, and it's thou shalt not defile the human soul. Huh. And when I see films like this that defile the human soul, I struggle with it, if I'm honest. And so when they're trying to get me to empathize with young lovers in a way that I would naturally empathize with young lovers, and then try to put in the elements of cannibalism. And yes, it's kind of acknowledged in this movie it's a bad thing. And yet there's also elements within this film that, hey, this is just the way we are, and you have to kind of accept us this way. And so I wrestled with those elements, if I'm honest, in this film.
I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, I'm not going to come out and condone cannibalism or anything like that. And
I'm not a canophobe. I'm not a canophobe.
No, you know, I respect their choices. They're just not my choices. Yeah. You know, but Luca Guadagnino, you know, he has obviously most famous for Call Me by Your Name, and he here is reunited with Timothée Chalamet from that film. But he has, you know, dipped his toe into the horror genre before. You know, he recently remade Dario Argento's Suspiria, and that certainly didn't hold back on the bones and all element once it got into that side of things. And so I was wary, and actually no, I wasn't wary. I was to be honest, I was hopeful that he was gonna go all out, and this, because I knew that this was primarily a romance. You know, it's a road movie. It's
Yes.
coming of age tale. It's a young lovers on the run story as much as it is anything else. I mean, it draws from films like Badlands and
Yes.
Bonnie and Clyde as much as it does, I think, from you know, more so than anything like sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or other cannibal movies.
Absolutely. Badlands was the movie that was coming to my head, and the other one was the Woody Harrelson movie. What's the Woody Harrelson
Natural
movie?
Born Killers.
Natural Born. Yes, that was the other one I was thinking of.
Right, and I think that's sort of totally fine, and I think that that's what they're skewing closer to. And I think that because I knew that that's where it was coming from, and that the novel was essentially aimed for a sort of not a young audience, but a kind of, you know, a teenage adolescent audience, if you like. I was worried that it wouldn't, you know, go all in on the horror stuff, you know, that it might end up being something a bit closer to Twilight, which, you know, deals with stories of vampirism, but in a way that it becomes a metaphor for chastity and abstinence. So I was quite relieved in a way when this very early on reveals itself to be, oh, we're going all in, you know, we're going to do the blood and the guts, and actually we're going to show you just how vile and repellent and difficult this path will be for them. Because I thought what's interestingly handled about this is that certainly for Maron, cannibalism is presented not as a choice, but as a compulsion. You know, there's something that they are born to do. And I think I think that's very deliberate, because I think it is not a great, unbelievable stretch to see this movie as a metaphor and as an allegory for sexuality. Let's start there. And that the story, although it's about a girl who can't stop eating human flesh and everybody around her is repulsed by it, and she feels that she's all alone in the world until she's finally flung out into it on her own. I think what it does is it plays into so many of those adolescent anxieties that we all have, where we all feel that we're a little bit different and that no one quite understands us. And it's only when we get out there into the world, out of our bubble that we were raised in, that we really recognize, oh, not only are there others like me, but there are others like me who are friendly and supportive and provide a network and a community, and are happy not only to accept but to sort of justify my existence. Who are there, who are going to say that not only is that there's nothing wrong with what you do, you know, we are the same. You're not alone, kind of thing. And so I was able to really sort of appreciate it on that level, that on the one hand, sure, it's about cannibals, but it's not really about cannibals.
No, and I think, though, if you use it as a metaphor, like let's say of, you know, somebody who's marginalized or dealing with those fringes of society because of maybe an orientation they have, it kind of works in a gay metaphor, in that you want to accept people for who they are. But the minute you take the metaphor into something more ghastly, see, I would relate this cannibalism, this horrific action that they do, to sexual abuse. You know, you have priests and you have people who are in positions of power who sexually abuse children, and they feel a compulsion. They have a very legitimate compulsion that they have, just like the two characters, the two young lovers in this film, and yet the results of their compulsion wretch the fabric of society. They rip fragments our society. And so for me, the allegory with something more benign like sexual orientation was lost because of the huge traumatic nature. I was metaphorically more putting this towards sexual abuse of small children.
Okay, I think that's a good one. I think the other one you could easily see in there is obviously addiction. Drug addiction,
yes.
something where it's a lifestyle that consumes you, takes over you, takes over every aspect of your life. It's all about, you become completely zeroed in on, okay, where am I getting my next fix from? And everything you do is a means to an end in order to fulfill that very sort of base need and desire. But in doing so, it drives you to the fringes of society. It drives you outside of the norm. So you become, by default, you become an outsider, somebody who is sort of suspicious, and it forces you to break the law. I mean, these young lovers are forced to murder people in order to quench the thirst that we have. And so, I felt that the film actually quite adeptly manages to straddle all of those things in a way that felt honest and dare I even say respectful to every one of them. I didn't feel shortchanged as an audience member looking for a horror movie, looking for a love story, or looking for an allegory about finding your place in society and the horrors of the real world. I felt that it addresses all of those elements equally, and with equal degrees of respect and seriousness.
And the acting performances by Taylor Russell, Timothée Chalamet, and I would say Mark Rylance. I just love Mark Rylance. I was joking before we went in that I didn't realize Mark Rylance was in this film, and I feel Mark Rylance makes every picture better, and he did in this as well. So the acting performances were wonderful. They were wonderful to watch. Watching Mark Rylance play that character who's borderline going to be a mentor and a person that you can trust, but deep down you can't let this person within. He's a monster. And that leads me back to a point I wanted to bring. What I was thinking in the movie was, in the past, whenever metaphors have been used in films to allude to, like, say, something like sexual orientation, I'm thinking like 1994's Neil Jordan's Interview with a Vampire,
right,
where you have vampires stand in for the sexual orientation element. And it's funny, I was listening to a review by NPR of the new Interview with a Vampire TV series, and they had a number of gay reviewers on the NPR panel, and they were talking about how they were young in college during the first movie, and how the subtext of that film, as opposed to the new series, which is overtly gay, so they don't have that issue. But with the previous incarnation from 25, 30 years ago, the subtext was all there, and how they identified with the metaphor. But with vampires, yes, they're monsters, but they're high society. They are immortal. They're beautiful. They listen to opera. They live the lap of luxury. They are cultured. And what we get in Bones and All is a very red state America. We get a poor Black girl. We get Timothée Chalamet plays a poor, for lack of a better term, but it's within the parlance of America. This is white trash America. This is trailer trash. Mark Rylance is that character we've all seen at one point, who you just know you need to keep him at arm's length, because he comes across really nice, but there's a psycho in there somewhere. And this is all very red state America. There is no high society. This is not Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, where I'm going to eat your liver with a nice Chianti and fiber beans and while I listen to opera. These are just poor, marginalized on society monsters. There's no redeeming qualities in them at all.
And what I thought was fascinating was the way that they eat. the way that they feed, because you don't often see them hunt like in the same way that you would often see like a vampire hunt. But they're certainly not. I mean, for people whose entire lifestyle is revolving around the consumption of human flesh, there's no sense of preparation. You know, there is no Hannibal the Cannibal element to any of this, where it's oh, well, this is the best bit and we should prepare it carefully. You know, these feed on humans like zombies do.
Yeah.
You know, they literally just go at you and take a bite out of you like you were a Thanksgiving turkey, and you know, just gnaw on you in whatever way they can that's easiest. And I thought that was, you know, that was fascinating. That strips away any kind of romanticism of their affliction completely. This is just, you know, at the very base, this is like sucking on a crack pipe kind of thing.
Yeah,
you know,
it's primal. It's primal.
Yeah, this isn't Sherlock Holmes, you know, playing his violin in between hits of methadone or heroin or whatever it is that he was on. You know, there's nothing beautified about this at all. And the fact that not only do they just kind of like go at it like face first, but then they sit back like they've been in a pie eating contest. And you know, Mark Rylance. I like that. There's this moment when Mark Rylance runs into Taylor Russell's character again, and he uses a very particular expression that we've never heard before, but you understand that it's a thing and it means something within their community, where he feels betrayed by him. He was like, "I dried off next to you."
Yeah,
you know, there's and we had seen them do that, although they didn't refer to it as that at the time, but where they had finished feasting on the same person, and then they sit back and they've got blood all down their faces and down their clothes. You know, there's no effort to keep the blood off their clothing even. And they just sit there, and he's in his underwear, and he's just got blood all down, and then eventually sort of says, "Oh yeah, I better go wash it off before it sticks." But this idea of drying off next to somebody, like that's a thing. It was so horrible, so unpleasant.
No, you're right. The vampire element of this is done in a very discreet way. This is very primal. This is very bestial. And yes, I got the same feeling you did, where it's when you said pie eating contest, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's where somebody would just be dripping with cherries, but they're just dripping with blood and flesh. And you know, the initial scene in Where Spoilers Show, where Taylor Russell's character is invited over to the sleepover, and they're under the table. I think they're just, and then she takes the girl's finger and she just starts eating it. That freaked me. I don't know if you saw. I jumped. You leapt, and I actually said, "What the f?" Gonna have to beep that out. But I said, because I was trying to mentally prepare myself for this movie. I knew I was not going into a Disney film, and yet that was so visceral. That was so primal. That was so unexpected, and it just kept going. It just was like, and it's that kind of filmmaking I both applaud and I'm repulsed by. And that's why I struggle with reviewing this film, because I applaud this movie at a certain level and I'm repulsed by it at a certain level. And maybe that's what good filmmaking. Normally I like the artistic that gives me an experience that is euphoric in nature. This one went the opposite direction, and I'm still kind of processing it, if I'm honest.
Well, no, and that's one of the things I really admire, as I mentioned earlier, that I really admired about it, is that there is this kind of preconception, this rather sort of snobbish preconception, if I might say that you know, high art and classy movies don't talk about gross stuff. You know, they don't show the nasty stuff. They might show a bit of sex, tasteful nudity, but when it comes to the real violence, no, that's. And it is this kind of inherent prejudice, I think, against the horror movie genre. You know, it's why it's never kind of taken seriously, because it's dirty and gooey and nasty and exploitative and all of these things. And I think that a film like this, what it manages to accomplish is sort of, I don't want to use the phrase elevated horror, because I don't really like that phrase particularly. But what it manages to do is create moments that are absolutely repulsive and disgusting, but do so in not a tasteful way, but a way that doesn't in any way compromise the artistic integrity of the endeavor,
Right.
which in all other areas, and I do want to get onto the other areas of the film and not just on its violence, is actually doing something really interesting, and it is creating sort of a mood and an atmosphere and an ambiance and a time and a place, and a general kind of mood that is consistent and effective and quite seductive in some ways.
Mm-hmm. I think what also worked too is, initially I thought this movie was going to be about two young lovers on a road trip who, through some kind of chance, need to or develop a taste for cannibalism, like they're experimenting or they're trying. I didn't realize it was going to be a inbred. There's almost the inference it's some kind of vampirism. It's been given hereditarily from Taylor Russell's mother, played by
you're
Chloe
born
Sevigny.
into it, definitely.
Yes. The very fact that there is some kind of, we don't know if it's a biological need or if it's a mental health issue, but that is never fully explained, other than there obviously is some hereditary elements to it. But I love that it was unexplained, because it lent itself more to the metaphor that it could be any kind of addiction. Because alcoholism, is it biological? Who knows? But I do know that if somebody's an alcoholic, the chances of their child being an alcoholic is so much greater.
Yeah, I think it is just hammering home the point that this is who they are. These aren't choices that they've made or a lifestyle that they are flirting with. This is who they are, and they need to find their place in society, wherever that may be, or deal with it.
Well, the reality is there is no place in society for them, though. That's what I would argue. There's a point where Timothée Chalamet is asking Taylor Russell, am I bad? Am I bad? And I wanted to leap up in my chair going, yes, you are bad. You kill people and you eat them. So if you're fuzzy on the whole good, bad thing, like you need to either be put down like a rabid dog, or you need to be locked up in some kind of institution with thick doors so you could never mete out this tragedy on anybody else again. And so, but in the narrative of this film, this is a question he's wrestling with, like any addict who's struggling with something. Again, it goes back to my metaphor about somebody who has compulsions towards child abuse or some kind of sexual assault, particularly on minors. Are they bad? I'm sure in everyday society they can give food at the food bank and organize the charity, and they can do these elements, and yet they do something that is so horrific as part of their nature that it has to be stopped. It can't be continued. Once it gets discovered, it has to be prosecuted. You need to be separated from society, because you coming back to Dune, you defile the human soul. Did I get preachy right there? Did my
that was good.
faith background? Did my faith background come in?
Let it flow. Let it flow. No, okay. What I wanted to do was let that finish, and then I have nothing to add to that, but I want to move on to another point. So I do want to talk about sort of other aspects of the film, not least its 80s setting, because it's not contemporary. It is set, I think, in the mid 80s. It's never specified, but we see her birth certificate, and she was born in 1970, and she's now 18, or she says she's 18. So we're never quite sure if she's actually 70, but she's a teenager. So it's somewhere in the mid to late 80s. I love the wardrobe, the costumes. Timothée Chalamet in particular rocks a pair of cut-off jeans like nobody perhaps should ever. But he has this obviously bizarrely kind of androgynous, gender fluid quality, which he's doing very well with. But I think in this film you see him actually exploit that at times as well. When he's looking for potential victims. And I loved the soundtrack. There's a score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which is kind of sort of quite unsettling, and it feels like it's sort of on sort of violins and banjos in a way that kind of evokes sort of a hillbilly white trash kind of culture.
Deliverance.
Exactly. But the soundtrack is also pretty incredible. There's sort of Joy Division in there. There's a number of sort of
Yes,
notable sort of 80s 80s hits in there, if you like,
Yeah.
which that young Kiss, of course, so these youngsters would be listening to, and it would very much sort of fuel their journey. And it evoked for me the films of Gus Van Sant, particularly his early movies. Drugstore Cowboy, similarly is about drug addicts who are on sort of a ruinous road.
Yes.
That's only headed.
And
and then obviously My Own Private Idaho, with sort of River Phoenix as a gay prostitute.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. Right. Well, the two films are very much of a piece.
Yes. When you said that, I was actually thinking My Own Private Idaho. Yes.
But both those films feel sort of that they exist in the same kind of universe of this movie. The way that it shoots the great outdoors and the great sort of barren wildernesses of Middle America, it was really powerful for me, and really sort of evoked those stories as well.
Very much. I mean, it's the juxtaposition. And I think it's very intentional that we take this road trip not through California and Oregon and Washington, but this is red state America. This is apple pie, hot dogs, and the juxtaposition of that with the elements that we've been discussing, I think make for a really good creative narrative.
Well, absolutely. These are the states that do not welcome people who think differently and want to live their lives differently to what is perceived as being normal. Obviously, this is taken to an extreme, but I hesitate to go all in and say that these characters are monsters, because I do believe in the layered allegory that it's trying to present here. Sure, yes, what they're doing is can be perceived as being against nature, but I think that's kind of part of the point, is that it's only from a certain perspective that it seems like that. In another point of view, this is just who they are behaving, living the life that they need to live. And they're being demonized. They're being Is a shark a monster? Is a shark a monster, or is he just trying to eat? Is he just looking for lunch? Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Well, James, I think we've had a really good discussion about the ins and outs and I was going to say
plenty to chew on. Plenty to chew on there.
That's where I wanted to go. Is your plenty to chew on. Every pun intended, of course. What instrument are we going to use here? And we have to be really careful here. We are I wouldn't say we're a family review show, but
I'm trying to think what would be a good one. Well, there are those hens, those little what are those country hens that he prepares.
I was gonna say how many gnawed off fingers.
Gnawed off, yeah, that's much better.
I do want to.
How many bloody stumps?
So, James, how many gnawed off fingers are you going to give Bones and All?
Okay, I really like this film. I appreciate the artistry. I definitely appreciate how its willingness to go there, as it were, and to represent, in ways above and beyond what the story may or may not be about. I think the performances are all great. I mean, Taylor Russell, I was watching the movie going, I don't think I've seen her in anything. And then I looked back and realized that I had actually seen her in a few things. But here she really kind of comes into her own, really sort of stands out. I mean, she is the lead. I know everybody kind of thinks of this as the Timothée Chalamet cannibal movie, but it's her movie. It's not his movie.
Yeah, in fact, I think Chalamet doesn't come in until at least a half an hour into the film.
Yeah, and then he comes and goes. He's not in it the whole way through. This is very much her story, and she owns it completely. She's brilliant. She's never less than wholly convincing, but that goes for everybody. I am a big fan of Luca Guadagnino, and I think this is one of his better efforts. I would say it's kind of a little longer than perhaps it needed to be, a little slower, and that you feel its length at times. Yeah. I have now seen it twice, and I did really appreciate it. So it's, a little bit less than perfect, and obviously because it is quite extreme, but I do want to give it a rock solid 4 gnawed off fingers out of 5.
I love how you do that. Yeah, that was good.
Got the angle right. I was like,
yeah. James, I think it's easier for you. You're a little bit more of a horror person. You came to watch this twice. I don't know if I would be up to watching this again. There's elements in it that I still struggle with. but I have to
we'll get you.
acknowledge
We'll
that-
get you there eventually.
Yeah, yes, that's right. It's I have to acknowledge though the artistic excellence in this film. And so I almost want to give 2 scores, but I know I can only give 1. And so I'm going to give this 3 nod off fingers. There's part of me that wants to go 1. Like, people should not see this. This is about people eating people. Stay far, far away. I do struggle. There's an element, and jokes aside, I always struggle in movies when when humans are being mutilated, or their spirit is being defiled, or they're being treated like meat and cattle. And when that woman was dying and they're waiting for her to die so they can gnaw into her, I have a very repulsed reaction to that. Humanity itself is being lessened, and so I struggle with that in this film, and I don't see that changing in me, although my tolerance for certain things might be raised. There's an element where I struggle with it. So I want to say, if you can't handle movies for the reasons I just gave, you shouldn't see it. But if you're listening to us, you probably have already seen it. Yes, difficult to. And so, hold on.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I think most people who'll be watching this have seen it already.
Yes.
I don't think it's an especially spoiler-tastic, and there are story points that we have not discussed, and I think I'm fine not discussing them.
Yes,
I think that's fine.
There's definitely elements there. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to give it 3 for artistic reasons. I think if you can enjoy this movie, you will enjoy this movie on a number of elements, on a number of levels. But I want to give the caveat that I still struggle with this film. So
no problem.
Well, that's James and I's view on it. Obviously, we have different ways of viewing and perspectives on this film. But what is your perspective? We would love to engage with you about Bones and All. Let us know what your thoughts are on the film in the comment box below. And James and I are on social media. So if you want to follow us on Instagram or Twitter, you can find those links in the description box below. James?
That's right. Yeah, do let us know what you think. Any other cannibal movies that you recommend? I can think of a few, but anything that you think that would be good for Steve to, just bite size, piece by piece.
Gnaw on a little bit.
Something for him to gnaw on. Exactly. Yes. Do let us know some of your favorites, and you never know. I might force Steve to do an entire cannibal sidebar.
Oh no, a whole series. We're going to do a whole new series on.
That's it. A buffet of cannibal movies.
Film Steve finds repulsive. We're going to just.
You ought to be in pictures.
Anyhow, until next episode.
You're wonderful to
Bye-bye.
see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.